You're on the air with Florenza, your podcast destination for authentic conversations with a twist. So, grab your favorite drink, get comfy, and join me on this unique literary journey. Cheers! Bonnie Kistler is known for her gripping psychological thrillers that often touch on current social issues. Her newest book, Shell Games, is a thrilling novel about a young woman whose mother might be the victim of an elaborate con or losing her mind, and the daughter can't tell where the truth lies. This story is inspired by a true crime from the 1980s, adding an extra layer of suspense and intrigue. Please join me in welcoming Bonnie to the show. Thank you so much, Bonnie, for joining me on today for this episode of On the Air with Florenza. We had a time to chat before we came on the air about your book, Shell Games, and I have to tell you, I love psychological thrillers, and this one was right up my alley. Now, the character, I don't have so much in common with the character other than the fact that my mother is in her 70s and very good looking. I wish she doesn't have the money issues that Kate has, nor does she have the clout. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Bonnie, and tell us why Shell Games and why now?
I'm a former lawyer. I practiced law in Philadelphia for many years, although I always wrote at the same time, and was happy to finally be able to make a break from the law and devote myself full time to writing. Shell Games is my fourth psychological thriller. And the reason why I wrote it now, well, there are a couple issues that were foremost on my mind. And one is I'm a part-time resident of Florida, have been for about 20 years. And during those 20 years have just witnessed an incredible amount of real estate development along the coast. And at the same time, I think what goes with that is damage to the environment. And climate change is obviously a subject that's, high on a lot of people's minds right now, mine included. And I thought, let's set this in Florida and make it a real estate developer. I really wanted to write a book about an older woman. There's this truism in commercial publishing, you probably heard, Florenza, that nobody wants to read about a woman over 40, which is when I think they just start to get interesting.
Absolutely. We don't even get spicy until 40.
So I really wanted to do that. But I also wanted to be sure I had a broad audience for this book. And so I told the story primarily through the eyes of her daughter, who's in her 30s. But it's Kate Sawyer, as you mentioned, she's a woman of 70, fabulously wealthy, very successful, self-made real estate developer. The other thing I wanted to do was write a powerful woman who did it on her own, who didn't marry money,
right?
Who didn't, wasn't boosted along through, on her husband's coattails, none of that kind of stuff. And also that it was not a female-coded industry like, Spanx or cosmetic company, one of those things. That it's, an industry, that business that's primarily considered male-dominated. So I loved creating this powerful woman, but then making her very vulnerable in the sense that she falls for her long-lost high school sweetheart, and at the beginning of the book is marrying him. And that's where, of course, we get into the gaslighting issues, which is the other thing I really wanted to write about, was the whole psychological phenomenon of gaslighting, and manipulating people so that they question their own grip on reality. And this book has gaslighting coming from, as I call it, gaslighting on steroids. Has gaslighting coming from all different angles. We don't know whether the new husband is gaslighting his bride to get control of her fortune, whether she's gaslighting everybody, whether the daughter herself is being gaslit, either by her new stepfather or by other people, other characters in the book. It's meant to be a little bit of a twisty maze that way, all full of games.
Now, have you had people who are either have received advanced copies or just through all the advertising and promo of the book call you and say, okay, Bonnie, I know you were writing about me and Julie or or Kate?
That hasn't happened with this book so far. But I have to tell you that some of my earlier books, which were much more grounded in law firms, where I spent so many of my hours, some of my former colleagues have sort of recognized some of their traits and have fortunately not seemed to be offended, but rather sort of amused and flattered by the fact that they work their ways into this book. It's, obviously every author, I'm sure you do the same, Florenza, is you draw from your own life experiences and people you encounter. And, the best inspiration for writing is real life and looking around at people and judging and assessing them and figuring out what makes them interesting.
Absolutely. Listen, in our lives, everyone and everything is fair game, right?
Yes.
That comes with being friends of an author. Everyone is fair game. What was your relationship like with your mom? Were you drawing in some of that relationship? I know I told you offline that my mom is in her 70s. I'm the last year of the baby boomer, so I'm 60. And I know that shift in our relationship, when my mom hit 70, it's a shift that I don't think everyone is prepared for. So were you able to draw from some of your own experiences?
There is this point, there was in my own relationship with my mother, who's gone now. And I think a lot of women in, middle age range start to experience this, where they sort of step into the role of parent.
Yes.
And there's obviously some friction there. The mother, bristles at the idea of suddenly being infantilized by her own daughter, but the daughter feels an obligation to care for her mother and to make sure and there's also a great resistance to wondering about the parent's mental state. And am I starting to see signs of dementia? And there's a lot of denial. It's like the stages of grief, wanting not to believe it and then getting angry about it. And that's part of what the daughter in this book goes through with her mother. Now, my own relationship with my mother, I dedicated this book to her memory, but it was very different because she was of a generation where she suppressed her own ambitions, make mine fly. I mean, she was the wind beneath my wings, to use that phrase. And that's not true in this book, where Kate is the domineering mother, and she has cast such a big shadow over her daughter, Julie, that Julie just seems very pale and kind of mousy in comparison. And although she loves her mother, she clearly has grown up under her shadow. And I was thinking about how different my own relationship was with my own mother when I was writing this. And it's part of what led me to dedicate the book to her. She could have been many things, including probably a wonderful author herself. But none of that happened for her. And I regret it for her. We had a wonderful relationship, but I would have loved for her to spend less time promoting me and more time promoting herself.
Oh, now did she pass after you were established as a writer? Was she able to see that part of your personality shine as much as from the legal side? Oh,
she was able to read my early books. And I have to tell you, one funny line was I was a little nervous because I had sex scenes in them. And nobody wants their mother reading their sex scenes. So I said something to her about, I hope it was okay. And she said, oh, it was fine. I've read Danielle Steele.
She's letting you know she's not so mousy.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, wonderful. Now tell me a little bit about the character Charlie and your development of his character and the role that he plays in the unfolding mystery.
Yes, yeah. Charlie is an ex-Marine, but not the blustering, bullying kind of stereotype that we sometimes see of non-commissioned officers. He's a salt of the earth guy. He is a good guy. He looked after his men. He cared for them. But he's been retired from the military for a while. And he and Kate, as I mentioned, were high school sweethearts, but their paths went in a very different direction. He was not a college guy. She was, she went to Radcliffe, and they lost touch. But then they're reunited at age 70. They're back together again and still in love. And this is part of Kate that I loved describing. She's brittle and hard-nosed in business, but when it came to her heart of hearts, she's just putty and she just loves him.
Just a romantic.
Yeah, so he's a good guy. I mean, and Julie loves him. She's taken to her new stepfather instantly. Everybody in their whole circle has immediately fallen for this man. He's the kind of guy who comes to your house and hears a leak and he gets down on the floor and fixes it. He's that kind of man. And that's why it's so devastating at the very beginning of the book on their wedding night when Kate calls the police in hysterics saying that Charlie has just confessed that he killed a bunch of people 30 years earlier.
Uh-huh.
Now, it's quickly established by the FBI that he couldn't have committed this crime. And Charlie himself says he never made this confession, that Kate obviously had too much wedding champagne and she's gotten confused and so forth. But Kate is quite insistent that he did confess to it. And if he confessed and didn't do it, the only possible reason that he confessed was that he's gaslighting her to get control of her fortune, to get around the prenup that they've signed. And so she immediately severs their relationship on their wedding night. And Julie, the daughter, just doesn't know what to believe. She loves Charlie. She loves her mother. She can't believe her brilliant mother is losing her mind, but she just doesn't understand what explanation there could be, what other explanation. And so the book goes on from there of this quandary that she's in and all the conflicting signals that she's getting as to exactly what's going on in this relationship between her mother and new stepfather.
What was the most difficult part of balancing the psychological thriller aspect, the romance that's taking place between Kate and Charlie, and establishing that for Kate? Also, we have Julie and Eric, and we're going to talk about Eric in just a bit, and also keeping the mystery of it all so high that I believe I read one review that said it is a one sitting read, like you absolutely just can't put it down. So how was that balancing all of that at one time?
The trick in all these books is when to reveal and how much to reveal when. And it's a delicate balance because, you give away too much. There's nothing more frustrating for a reader in this genre to say, I figured it out at the very beginning.
Oh, yeah.
That's what keeps the pages from turning, is where I already know how this is going to end. And you run into a lot of readers who'll say, I flipped to the end, saw that I was right, close the book. That's obviously not what readers in this field are looking for. But at the same time, you can't not give them enough clues that it comes as a complete out of left field at the end.
Right.
Like, well, I never saw that coming and I never could have seen that coming. You have to have that very delicate balance of just the right doses at the right time. And a lot of it's just as instinctive, trying to figure out what would keep me going at this page. I finished this page, what would keep me going at the next point, and trying to go from there. But it's hard to put into words what, how to write that formula because it's so tricky.
Now, how much of your real life experience of being an attorney fit into your ability to pace, and as well as your knowledge of these crimes that take place, or just the seedy part of humanity, if you will?
Well, fortunately, didn't practice too much in the seedy part of the world because I didn't do criminal law. I did primarily corporate litigation. So I represented big companies who were suing each other over money. So it was
There's no seedier than that.
You're right. Yes, I shouldn't make it sound like that's so wholesome. It can be quite seedy, but I never got into the street level of seediness. I think that I definitely think that my years as a lawyer have informed my writing. Because I was a litigator, what you do is spend a lot of time packaging a case. And that means taking the facts, picking out the ones that are best for your side, massaging them, polishing them, falling short of making them up, but putting them together in a persuasive way, designed to persuade the judge or the jury, or sometimes just to persuade your opposing counsel that they better cave because you've got the better case. And it's all a matter of persuasion, packaging and persuasion. And when I write fiction, I'm again taking the available facts, although this time I get to make them up, but putting them together in a way that I hope will be engaging. And that's another thing that in court, it's very hard. Trials are boring by and large. It's very hard to get the attention of a judge and jury. So you try to be as engaging as possible and not let their minds stray, not bore them. And so that's a skill I hope I've also, transferred over to my fiction writing, is keeping the reader entertained and engaged, and then ultimately persuaded that this is the world you're stepping into, and come along on this journey with me.
Nice. Now, Shell Games, as well as some of your other titles, are standalone. Do you have readers that come and say, "Oh my gosh, Bonnie, I just need for you to just bring that character back. I want to know more about them."
And that does come up. Not so much that they want to know more about them, but I just really liked the gutsy woman you had in The Cage, for example. And because there the heroine has a great revenge arc and really comes out on top. And people were, like, what would she do now? Now that she's on top and she's vanquished all of her foes, now what's her next act? But I've never been interested in doing a sequel, and certainly not a series. And the reason for that is that I'm really big on character arcs and having the character go through a life-changing experience so that they are sort of a different person by the end of the book. And when you're doing a series character, they can't change too much because it's got to be the same person carrying over from book to book. And so as I always say, I put my characters through the ringer, and there's not enough left of them to go to another book.
Not enough left. Now, we alluded to Eric a bit earlier. Tell us a little bit about his character and how he works throughout the story, because he comes in one way and ends completely different. And just give us a little backstory about who he is.
Yes, Eric is Julie's husband, and he's a doctor. He's an orthopedic surgeon, which in Florida, with their elderly population, is equivalent to God. And he definitely has a God complex, and has, his patients are basically worshipers. And it's carried over into his marriage. He's a very controlling husband. And another reason why Julie is kind of mousy and pale is not only did she have this overshadowing mother, but now she's got a husband who's domineering and doesn't really allow her to stand up on her own. But he's got a backstory. He did not come from money, and in fact has a father who was a compulsive gambler and has caused a lot of marital family problems in his family. And so that he's been this guy who he did not appear to have married Julie for her money connections, but it's always been in the back of his mind that she has this billionaire mother, that even though they're not living high on the hog now, that day may someday arrive. But he's got his own pressures brought on by his own family issues. On top of all that, he and Kate, his mother-in-law, took an instant dislike to each other. She thinks nothing of him. She thinks he's a glorified mechanic and a bone doctor. That's right. And he thinks that, and he accuses her of sinking into dementia. And so when this issue of the confession, the wedding night confession, comes out, he's very quick to say, she's finally snapped. She is completely demented. And Julie doesn't want to believe that, but he's insistent. And this fuels Kate's further paranoia that not only is Charlie trying to gaslight her to get his money, but he's recruited her son-in-law, Eric, to join the cause, all designed to really persuade Julie. And that's what Kate believes, is that Julie's the one actually being gaslit, because they're trying to persuade Julie that her mother's losing her mind and get her to, join Charlie in having the mother committed. So Eric is he's not somebody I'd want to be married to, but Julie is besotted, and it's really, in Julie's case, a sexual addiction. She has become enthralled to him from the moment they met, and they have a very rich sex life. But as Kate tells her at one point, you guys are going to get divorced as soon as the sex starts to fade. And it happens before that, but it was an interesting take on a marriage where you can see that Julie is not as meek as she appears. She's smarter than she thinks she is. She's certainly smarter than everybody else thinks she is, but she allows herself to get confined in this marriage because, she's just so enthralled to this husband. And that, obviously, that's got to break.
Nice. As you're writing now, being a lawyer, my guess is that you are a strong plotter. Were there aspects of writing, especially this story, that as you were working through the details, even you were surprised with something that emerged? And did it change the trajectory of the story, or did you just allow yourself to kind of think that through and it ended up in the trash?
Florenza, it may surprise you. It surprises a lot of people that I am not a plotter at all. And people
Applause,
are shocked and say,
applause.
how can it be? I am not a plotter. I'm not, the corollary to plotter is pantser, meaning
Right.
you fly by the seat of the pants. I'm not a pantser either. I think that sounds too haphazard. Always start with an opening premise, like what if kind of
Uh-huh.
premise. And I always have an idea, pretty clear idea of where the book's going to end up. And I might know a few of the mileposts along the way, but I don't have any clear, and I I literally do make stuff up as I go along. And part of the reason I don't do a scene by scene outline is that, usually takes me about a year to write a book. And I
Uh-huh.
do get easily bored by many things, and I don't want to get bored by my own book. And I think if I knew, down to the moment what was going to happen next, I might get bored with my own book and
Uh-huh.
not have the momentum to keep going. So I like to surprise myself a little along the way. And so, yes, in this one, there were some things that came to me, pretty late in the game. I thought, oh, that's what that should be.
Oh.
There's a character that's introduced early, and he appears now and then in interaction with Julie. I don't want to give too much away about this, but I thought, how does he fit into this whole gaslighting scheme? Is there anything going on here? And I was fairly far along before I thought, oh, that's what he's up to. That's why he's doing this. And that was a moment that surprised me, and I was very happy that it happened when it did.
Nice. And I guess that shows in the writing, because again, everyone is saying you're going to read it through in one sitting. And it took me too, but my crazy life, but it was exciting enough that I could have read it in one sitting. Now we're getting close to Thanksgiving. Which of the characters would be sitting at the Thanksgiving table with you and create the biggest scene of all the
Oh,
characters in Shell Games?
what a clever question. Well, the characters that would create the biggest scene would be Kate and her son-in-law, Eric, because they dislike each other so much. They're both strong personalities. Neither one of them would ever be the type to bite their tongues.
Uh-huh.
So I can see, political discussion, I can see all kinds of terrible things happening there. But there's another character who I'm very fond of. He's a more remote character, but he's a climate activist who becomes involved with Julie, her company, and her mother's company, et cetera. And he was a lot of fun because he's a very much the opposite of Eric.
Uh-huh.
He's a young, idealistic, wants nothing for himself kind of guy, only wants the good of the world. And I think because with that attitude goes a little bit of self-righteousness. And so I think that he could easily get into an argument with Kate over that Thanksgiving dinner table about her environmental practices and the extent to which she's harming the environment with her buildings and her paving over the coasts, et cetera. So they could have a big fracas.
Nice. Okay. So that would be a wonderful Thanksgiving event after all. Where are the listeners able to engage with you and follow you and learn all things Bonnie Kistler?
Well, I have a website, bonniekistler.com, that has links to all of my social media. I'm on Instagram. I have a Facebook page. I've given up on X, so I don't go there very often, but I'm on Threads now, which has been fun. So yes, please come see me on social media.
Awesome. Now we've come to the part of our show that I call One for the Road. And essentially, it's this or that questions where I ask you one of two things, and you just pick the one that resonates with you the most. And probably because it's super early my time, some of these random ones came up. But waffles or pancakes?
Pancakes.
Pancakes. Roller coasters or Ferris wheels?
Oh, I can't do roller coasters anymore. I guess I'll say Ferris wheel.
Time travel to the future or go back to the past?
Oh, that's a really good one. there's so much I'd like to see how it played out in history, but I'm really, really curious about what the future holds. And I think I really need to know what the future holds, because that would help me inform my life today. If I knew, for example, what's the climate situation going to be for my grandchildren, that kind of thing. So I think I'll go to the future.
To the future. And super strength or super speed?
Could I add another? I've always wanted, my superpower would be teleportation. If I could instantly snap my fingers and be in another continent without having to go through all the hassle of traveling, I would love that.
That would be great. That would be great. Well, thank you so much, Bonnie, for joining us. And I'm excited about the release of your book. And I know all the readers will as well.
Thank you, Florenza. It was a pleasure talking with you.
You as well.
And this wraps up another episode of On the Air with Florenza. You may follow me on all social media platforms under Florenza Lee or via my website at florenza.org. Until next time, cheers.